Remember this video back in the early Forsaken days of February, where everyone was fresh as a daisy trying to learn how each and every character worked? I made a killer ranking of the 4 killers: Jason, Cool Kid, John Doe, and 1x. This was the time where it was a literal sin to even have 10 days on the game, and I had 17 hours at the time of this admittedly very bad video. I acknowledged everything from a surface point of view. I didn't consider strategy and purely based my ranking on effectiveness of each killer ability separately. It was a bad video, but today is about a new and updated Forsaken killer ranking that takes a deep dive into actual strategy and effectiveness of each killer. And also maps can be considered too. I'm also introducing the twist of you guys actually being part of the ranking. In my community post, I asked for your own rankings which are fully contributing to the outcome of this list we're about to create right here, along with using your comments to support my script. If you want a chance to participate in videos like this in the future, leave a subscribe as we're approaching 15,000 subs pretty soon. So this ranking is built off of both my opinions, your opinions, and the overall effectiveness of each Forsaken killer in this meta. Enjoy the video. 5 is Jason. Before getting into what some people will see as an absolutely horrific placement, here's some stats I collected. Out of all the people we surveyed, only 2% of participants think Jason is the best killer. And just for an idea of what I'm going on at, 60% of you guys put Jason as a bottom 2 killer. That's pretty harsh of a placement, so why is this? I'll start off with what absolutely demolishes Jason and why he ended up in this spot. Since the game is involved, Jason is slowly creeping up to be the most poorly designed killer, and I'm being genuine with that statement. Unless the developers put more of a work to cut down on looping, we might not see this killer ever become notably balanced ever again. Jason is a killer who has no ranged abilities, no speed up abilities, no summoning abilities, no projectile abilities, simply just a glorified M1s right in front of him. Beehand and Gashing Wound can only be used up close, and while yes, this leads to the two abilities being unbelievably powerful among landing, this doesn't exactly compensate in the context of Forsaken. Raging Pace is his only slither of hope with a small walking speed boost and a lunge it gives Jason after using, but this isn't really much. So looping, the simple strategy of running around and around and around a single piece of terrain or structure to give yourself seemingly infinite stalling capabilities. As killers are faster than survivors, this isn't necessarily an infinitely working strategy, but it sure does waste an astronomical amount of time, and any move, such as a stun or a subspace trip run to the face, will instantly reset the timer. Looping is a huge issue in Forsaken, and now that the game has been out for a solid 7 months, players are really beginning to adapt the environment and abuse this strategy to the limits. Unfortunately for Jason, he doesn't exactly have a counter to it. 1x, projectiles. John Doe, spikes. Cool Kid and Nully even have their own projectile that is made to hinder looping. Jason has absolutely nothing, and this is by far the biggest key factor in arguments you guys gave to this ranking. I'm going to be introducing some of my own viewers' opinions in this part of the video, and I will also include where they place the killer at hand next to their username right here to give context of what they're arguing for. He kind of relies on his movements to win games, and he has 0 ranged abilities. Because of that, if Jason doesn't know how to use Raging Pace, he could just easily be looped and lose a lot of chases or waste time. He gets looped hard. Sure, he'll eventually kill the survivor that's looping him, but the survivor will still waste a lot of Jason's time. If he goes up against a coordinated team of experienced survivors that are in a VC, he's basically cooked, as survivors like Chance, Dusakar, Builderman can ruin Jason's chances of winning without putting themselves in danger. If Jason does decide to switch targets, he is giving a survivor he was chasing time to recover, and souls to catch up in the new target. Once again, he isn't bad, he could be really powerful, but at least in my eyes, he is one of the worst killers in the game. He has basically no counter to looping. Raging Pace isn't viable enough for a loop counter at all because he just isn't fast enough during it. He relies purely on good stamina management. The only way to catch up to a good player who can loop is to rely on all killers' slightly altered stats for stamina gain, speed, and stamina depletion. And all of that is just for a sentinel to stun you, making you lose all your progress on catching up to a survivor. Being stunned as Jason is brutal because all the time and progress you spend chasing a survivor is instantly deleted. Against the coordinated team, he is pretty easily countered. He is still strong, but he is way too dependent on the survivors themselves. These are really strong points to back up what I just went over. Jason has serious flaws when it comes to looping in a skilled, coordinated team. Having a high punishment ability against Sentinels is blatantly reinforcing the idea that he is truly only good against a team this flawed, and it doesn't take a genius to see why he ended up in number 5 for that reason. You can make the argument for every killer, but it isn't more apparent in any more than Jason. The absolute best argument to shed light on Jason is from Pacat. Jason, however, is who I believe to be the worst killer. Looping isn't hard, every survivor has access to it on every map, and considering how big Forsaken maps are, and just how many looping spots there are in each map, when your weakness is just looping, that makes you a pretty pathetic killer. Think about it, Jason is the second fastest M1, coming out in 0.2 seconds. No human can realistically react to this, so they would need to predict this attack beforehand to dodge it. He also deals a total of 28 damage with this attack, with 20 base and 8 bleed, and this is an amazing M1, the best in the game if you really think about it, but that's it. Behead deals 20 damage, lunges you forward, and then slows you down. Even if you hit this, you lose out on distance. Applying Helpless is okay, but you don't need abilities to loop, so it doesn't defend him against his biggest counter. Gushing Wound. This move is way too situational to be good for any of his weaknesses Jason has. And finally, Raging Pace. This ability is alright, but Jason only recovers 90 stamina from it, and the survivor can recover stamina during this move too, even more than Jason can. This leaves Jason with no realistic counter to looping, and this argument hasn't even touched on his second weakness, Teamwork. Jason is a single target killer. Like most, the difference being that Jason can't really switch off the survivor he's locked onto because he doesn't have any good tools of doing so. His M1 is the only good source of dealing group damage, and no survivor team is dumb enough to walk into Jason's M1s while he's chasing someone else. And since Jason only has to focus on one person to get a kill, it allows all the other survivors to do generators, set up buildings and traps, stun Jason, heal teammates, whole 9 yards. So Jason can not only not deal with looping, but he also can't deal with a good team, making Jason the worst killer. Jason is definitely looking to be the killer who ages the worst if they don't balance him correctly. I truly do think that any arguments that are in support of this killer being first place are not looking at his kit of abilities and overall effectiveness from a true standpoint. I'm not going to show names, but these two comments I received really show how Jason is misinterpreted. I love being able to use Gushing Wound to punish all sentinels who can't stun me in time. I love how Raging Pace can avoid a stun, and overall, it is just a menace in the right hands. A fast and dangerous killer with good punishing moves like Gushing Wound or Behead, he can also catch up to survivors easily with Raging Pace and an easy way to regain stamina and find survivors. It's unfortunate the path Jason has taken in this game. Maybe when he was getting redesigned for Slasher, the devs might tweak his moveset to work in this game better, who knows. Interestingly enough, the argument for the first place killer in this video is actually perfectly mirroring exactly what makes Jason so weak. Pretty interesting plot setup for how killers are interpreted in Forsaken, so let's go to number 4. Number 4 is John Doe. John Doe as a character likely has the least to talk about on this list. His intended strategy, moveset, ability kit, they all kind of just fall short in comparison to everything else in Forsaken. Well, John Doe ironically heavily counters looping, which was the entire idea of Jason getting so beaten and bruised, but John certainly has his own set of problems and insecurities. Why did that line sound so personal? Regarding stats, around 25% of people said he was top 2 killers and around 55% claiming he was bottom 2. First off, let me introduce a topic called skill ceilings. What these are pretty self-explanatory. A skill ceiling is essentially the difficulty of mastering a character in any skill-based video game. The amount of work you need to put into a survivor or killer to claim you've officially mastered them. Buildermain is a good example of a relatively low survivor skill ceiling in Forsaken, mostly just requiring some spatial awareness of the killer and map knowledge so you know where to put buildings in effective spots. On the other side of the spectrum, a sentinel like Guest has such a high skill ceiling you essentially can't reach it and nobody ever has, requiring absolutely perfect prediction skills and reaction time, which humans can't genuinely have. Applying this to the killer, the highest skill ceilings come from the similar aspects, such as John Doe or 1x players having pinpoint perfect accuracy with their ranged attacks. Why did I go on this tangent? Well, how should skill ceilings be interpreted in this ranking? Technically speaking, John Doe would and should have at least the top 2 killers in the game when it comes to how goddamn overpowered he would be if the player landed every single spike perfectly. So if it wasn't already obvious, just because a killer has a high potential does not necessarily mean they could be higher on the list. It all boils down to objectively how hard it is for the playstyle to be effective in Forsaken. So, how does John's playstyle hold up? His intended strategy is the idea of trapping. Literally, corrupt energy is an unpassable wall of spikes, and digital footprints can block off popular gathering spots, looping spots, and more. But this is just... Don't get me wrong, when the trapping works, you bet your ass it works well, but in most scenarios, it is so hard to make a successful trap without any loopholes the survivor can use, especially with whatever the devs think they're doing with the new maps. Seriously, why are they just becoming open fields of nothingness? Cool Carnival is by far the best laid out map, and yet they keep making the same mistakes with Underground War and Tempest. Essentially, John Doe simply isn't really effective in doing what he's designed to do, and 90% of the time, it isn't even his fault. Here's some other opinions on this topic. With the nerf to the passive and buffs to existing killers, plus the drop of a new killer that leans into his role, John Doe has been power crept hard recently. Getting him to milestone 4 was a chore before the Noli update, when overall teamwork was stronger, and afterwards, he's lost some of his remaining edge to Noli's trickery and some of 1x's end lag buff. He's quite map dependent, but on an enclosed map like Horror Hotel, he could trap and kill a lot of people. However, on an open map, it's easy to avoid the digital footprints. It's also really hard to land corrupt energy sometimes on someone. It could be used for trapping on enclosed maps, but he's very vulnerable to sentinels when doing so. He doesn't necessarily suck as terribly as people want you to think, but his M1 takes 5 business days to come out, and a super obvious sound cue and animation. He's also pretty slow. He's also really map dependent. Even after the remake, Planet Boss is still torture for him. However, given the right map, he is a demon, especially given the mindset of the trapper instead of a sniper. He's supposed to be a trapper, but his wall is the only thing that works for him. And honestly, it's way too slow to consistently trap on most maps. It's so easy for survivors to just avoid it, dodge it, or even get flung over if you hit them. That's only if the wall even goes far enough and he has no holes in it, so you can most likely get to them yourself. I really like what all 3 of these individuals have covered around John Doe. He's an agonizing amount of lost potential for being a more interesting and fun killer for surprisingly both survivors and himself, but the way the maps are built to painfully lock him out of this potential. Every single comment I read about John reflected his map dependency, and it is quite definitely an issue. So yes, ironically being the biggest counter to looping, his own set of issues really created a contrasting outcome of John, either being a menace or absolutely being pummeled. Such a depressing, vulnerable killer who could be so much more. Number 3 is Noli. Oh, Noli is actually quite a mess of a killer. His debut was rough. It was literally impossible to tell if Noli was going to be stupidly overpowered or an absolute washout. Actually, I still don't think people know how to feel about this guy. His kit of abilities is way different from anything else in Forsaken in terms of how effective they are. Quite frankly, it's hard to deal damage with Noli compared to other killers. Void Rush is a walk speed override, but you need to be better at timing and aiming, as well as quick decision making. Nova is corrupt nature, but you need to be skilled at aiming it perfectly to pull survivors in as you want. And then you need to be able to consider how you can use hallucination to your own advantage, which adds another whole layer of how complex Noli is. I'm gonna let the comments start this one, because I don't really know where to go. There is never a moment where I wouldn't be on edge whenever the killer is Noli. His Void Rush always seems to come from an unexpected angle, and if they spam Observant throughout the game, it's going to be hard keeping track of anything. The only reason he's 4th is because his M1 is so hard to land for me, and basically impossible on a server with high ping. If you want to punish survivors and close the distance between the survivors, you have to know how to use Void Rush, and this is where things get ugly for Noli, as certain maps make it really hard for him to continue using Void Rush without running into something such as the many looping spots and work at a pizza place. If you can use Void Rush consistently, he can be really good, but if you can't, he's a sitting duck. Overall, Noli's performance relies upon a single ability that requires a good amount of skill to use on all the maps, putting him in a weird limbo where he's kinda map dependent and kinda skill dependent as well. He's hella overpowered right now, and I think he'll get a nerf soon, but as of right now, he is totally busted. Void Rush can go through walls, and chaining grants of extra speed for every trap so you can go through even thicker walls. Observant lets you teleport basically around the entire map unrestricted, and gives survivors hallucination depending on how far they are, which can be changed with Void Rush to instantly go to the slam. Just play Noli like you're playing a freight train. Okay, so very different opinions here. Void Rush is most definitely a really messy ability in terms of difficulty, consistency, and actual effectiveness. The fact that it's the definitive ability actually makes talking about Noli pretty difficult, but I suppose the number 3 spot is pretty solid given the context. When it comes to looping, Noli is sometimes okay with it. Nova is literally designed to be anti-loop, but there are some spots where it literally doesn't work like this at all, like that one in Underground War. And this is so bad that it makes Noli's looping issues almost as bad as Jason sometimes. That is concerning. Map dependency, as all the comments claimed, is unfortunately also an issue Noli suffers. Void Rush is so easy to dodge. All you need is the tiniest bit of a wall or a stick out on the ground, and it feels like when I'm playing Noli, I'm hard focusing on my surroundings of when there's enough, but not too much open space to use Void Rush. And this opportunity does not appear often enough for the ability you're supposed to rely on. Regarding his other abilities, I used to say Nova was pretty weak, but I've actually completely flipped my opinion. Nova is genuinely not so effective in preventing looping, but I found surprisingly good use in doing this strategy I like to call Nova stabbing, as there's almost no cooldown between using your stab and Nova, leading to an extremely easy, mostly consistent damage. A slight tug of a survivor toward the spot you sometimes didn't even land effectively isn't really good, like Corrupt Nature, which, mind you, also goes through walls. Also, I think that this comment describes Noli and his difficulty spot to land really well. Noli, at first, I struggled to utilize the mechanics of Noli. After a while, though, I realized that Noli is never too far away from any survivors with his abilities Void Rush and Observant with great mobility. Even if I get stunned, I can easily catch up in a matter of seconds afterwards, and if those abilities are available. Sometimes, though, I can't land any abilities and I lose. Observant is actually really useful. It changes up the idea of how a killer finds survivors, and paired with Void Rush, make sure you're never safe from Noli. Due to how Void Rush gets you across maps so quickly, I think these two paired together actually makes genius ability design. It also inflicts all survivors with hallucination, leading to a chase opener for a possible 40 damage. But again, Noli getting tugged back by his struggles with both looping and map dependency, along with this absolutely a wild abilities, makes him pretty hard to rank. They aren't as bad of debuffs as they are for both Jason or John Doe, but still very notable. And of course, we're early in the lifetime, and this could change in the future. Oh, and regarding stats, a solid 1 in 3 people actually put Noli smack in the middle at number 3. I suppose we're not the only ones who don't really know where to put him, though he still has around 45% in the bottom 2 placements. Number 2 is Cool Kid. I would say I'm surprised, but truthfully, I don't know where else Cool Kid can go. I've seen so many arguments that he's just a worse Noli now, but according to the admittedly very close poll results, Cool Kid got 2nd place. Now, I still personally didn't expect this at all. The new walk speed override bounce changes making the ability worse in almost every way was so devastating, I genuinely thought that it killed the character, but I suppose not. Controversially the lowest skilled killer in the game, let's see what you all had to say about Cool Kid. Cool Kid is all around a very balanced killer with range, speed, and damage options. His biggest downside is his predictability, but that usually isn't a huge issue if you're playing well, and can even be used against good survivors by predicting what they're going to do to you. The minions can apply pressure as well if Cool Kid's speed and projectiles. Extremely easy to use, incredibly fast, and heavy hitting attacks that let you damage an abundance of people in quick succession. Very easy to use, great skins, that doesn't count, and Corrupt Nature is easily to catch up if they are looping you. Pizza minions are very good, walk speed is a far range gashing wound, and the M1s are instant. Him not having a tracking ability is infuriating though. Something that definitely needs to be addressed is his lack of tracking abilities, which is actually extremely impactful in some scenarios. You can't make the excuse that his detection isn't by far the worst in Forsaken, but for his positives, Cool Kid is anti-loop with minions and Corrupt Nature, not map dependent whatsoever, and incredibly fast. Aside from the lightning quick walk speed override, his M1 is almost instant and all of his abilities have quick cooldowns. He is an absolute powerhouse in the hands of a player who is good at surprise, spatial awareness, and keeping track of players with both the lack of tracking abilities and Corrupt Nature. Cool Kid is still a mixed bag because he possesses abilities that a lot of other killers have and doesn't have a direct strategy, like how John Doe is a trapper and 1x uses projectiles. Cool Kid has both a punishment ability like Gashing Wound, a projectile like Nova or 1x, and a minion summon, as well as a walk speed having some similar aspects to Corrupt Energy. This makes Cool Kid incredibly hard to interpret, a very similar issue but to Noli. John Doe, Jason, 1x, they're all relatively easy to talk about. Cool Kid, not so much. You either love him or you hate him, but at the end of the day, you can't deny that he is somehow a powerhouse, even after the walk speed override getting a good chunk of its effectiveness cut off. But to take a deeper dive into what the weaknesses of Cool Kid are, since the inclusion of Noli, most of his abilities have been outclassed. He could still be good as they are fast with moves that can help him catch up by slowing survivors with Corrupt Nature and minions to help him find survivors in a not so efficient way while also doing damage. He is the easiest killer to play in this game, having simple, straightforward moves. He can be easy to predict and juke. Though, if he tricks you, it can be really punishing, since he has pretty high damage on walk speed override. The big problem with him is his lack of tracking abilities, which he can be really punishing, especially in Last Man Standing, and for me, it's what draws him back. The minions just aren't great at the job, and I just can't get a hold of the reworked walk speed override. He isn't as good as you think he is. Yes, he may be able to deal massive damage from far with walk speed and Corrupt Nature. Noobs and N7s are his direct counter. Hell, even guests can just counter walk speed. And if you don't know where Survivor is in LMS, it's just GG's. Also, Cool Kid's M1 hitbox is actually the smallest of them all, making you have to go closer to the survivors, which can make them easier for 2x to trick stab and Shaletsky's to slash. Pizza bots could have been much better if they were a little slower than the survivor's normal walk speed, like 0.2 or 0.4 studs less. He's by far wonderful if you can predict where survivors' locations are, but horrible if they're just going to juke out where you think they're going to go. In summary, Cool Kid is hard to rank. He is the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, along with being considered the lowest skill killer in the game. It's a mess to rank. For stats, 50% of people voted him as the top 2 killer and only 32% as bottom 2. And number 1 is 1x. Did you expect this? I sure did. 1x is such a wildly designed killer. When taking a deep dive into this character like I did for the last section of this video, it really just baffled me on how insane this killer can and actually is. 74% of people voted 1x as a top 2 killer, and only 12% voted as a bottom 2. Those are insane stats for a total of 5 killers in this game. Not only does 1x check all the boxes of not being loopable, barely map dependent, and having the highest potential to be an absolute powerhouse, or in other words, the hardest killer to counter in Forsaken. The 2 projectiles make looping impossible, especially Entanglement, pausing the survivor in place. You may think 1x is very map dependent. The projectiles are horizontal, so any elevation will stop them from landing. Well, yes, that is true. It's also worth keeping in mind that 1x's strategy isn't just to send projectiles from the other side of the map where survivors are a lot higher up than you. With 1x, you can use your prediction skills to completely shut down chases and swiftly kill survivors. Very few areas of the map may have such drastic elevation changes that this strategy becomes ineffective. And even so, the projectile cooldowns are also short enough, along with not halting you in place for too long. It isn't really a huge punishment to miss them. In fact, you can go smooth sailing by only landing around 50% of your projectiles, which is actually pretty crazy to think about. First, we got Mass Infection, the heavy hitter projectile that could be sent to anywhere in the map on your elevation level to occasionally jumpscare someone who didn't react to the sound, or used for extremely severe punishment for missing stunts from sentinels and being trapped. Entanglement, on the other hand, is an insanely quick projectile to pause survivors in place for up to 2.5 seconds, inflict with helpless, and give you enough speed to almost guarantee you another hit. The main point I want to make with 1x is of course his reliance on predictability. Ranking this killer is actually by far the most biased you can get because it is purely based off of your own skills and prediction, as 1x is the hardest killer to master. So 1x is an absolutely unstoppable madman in the hands of a skilled player, or an absolute washout in the hands of an average player. And all of this, of course, ties into the skill of the survivors too. Here's some of the comments of the people who placed 1x really high up. The damage potential for 1x is insane, and the argument I usually see is that you will never hit every single shot unless you're in a perfect world. However, 1x relies on prediction of movements more than any other killer because of how his attacks work. If you could figure out someone's movement and hit them with Entanglement, or just hit Entanglement on them before they could react, then 1x doesn't exactly need to rely so heavily on his projectiles anymore unless they are a no-life. However, I'm assuming that you are not playing against literal robots, because 1x relies on the mistakes of other people more than every other killer, and we are bound to make those because we're human. Yeah, sure, the buff made him not absolutely overpowered in LMS anymore, but can we talk about how his projectiles have an extremely low cooldown in a whole map range? Yeah, some people say he is super hard to play, or bad because he is too slow, but if you're facing a 1x player who knows that hit his projectiles, oh boy, you're in trouble. Against those players, stuns are basically nothing, since when they get up, they just throw an Entanglement or keep chasing, or throw a Mass Infection to chip survivors' health down, or use Unstable Eye to get a speed boost and Aura Reveal to keep chasing. Don't even get me started on Unstable Eye plus Entanglement plus Mass Infection combo. They nerfed him a lot when they prevented speed 3 stacking in LMS, but the minions apply great pressure during that time. The nerf was necessary as LMS was nearly unwinnable with half-decent 1x players. Thanks to his projectiles, he has constant pressure on the majority of maps, especially pre-redesigned Planet Voss, which is usually a different round for every killer. 1x is also by far the best killer in LMS, not just for what I already established above, but it's basically guaranteed that you're going to use the Rejuvenate the Rotten ability at the start of it to summon your minions and apply extra pressure, along with having a constant supply of speed 1 to assist you during that. Also, Unstable Eye is some free speed in a chase whenever you need it, even if it's at the cost of blindness. When it comes to 1x's weakness, well, they're actually completely identical to his strengths. This killer is so skill-based and player-dependent like no other character in the game. Well, 1x is simply the best killer in Forsaken due to his extremely heights of potential, blatantly powerful abilities only purely locked away only by your own drawbacks and occasional survivor mistakes, and, of course, the dominance in Last Man Standing. Some comments I read arguing against 1x being so high up were simple displays of the killer being bad, which is far too biased to appear in a killer ranking. And if I were to rank the killers to my personal self, 1x would appear last. So even though I've technically created a ranking of Jason, John Doe, Noli, Cool Kid, 1x, this ranking is simply the Forsaken community's average opinion, while also compared with factual strengths and weaknesses put into the context of Forsaken's meta as of July 2025. Due to this, your ranking could be just the complete opposite, and in your own way, that is just as valid as anyone else's. So truly, it is impossible to make a ranking of Forsaken these days due to how well crafted each and every gameplay mechanic is. It leads to so much bias of who prefers what style. A message I truly want people to take away from this video is that you have every right to disagree with my ranking. It is simply impossible to make the perfect ranking of Forsaken, and one specific lineup should never be considered correct. It's all up to you. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a good day.